This podcast is the design of City Sites Urban Media, and our goal is to bring into focus the difference between culture and God's ideas found in His Word. To learn more, go to citysitesurbanmedia.com.
I think it's really important in any relationship that you ask yourself this question: what is my cost for being in this relationship? Because there's a cost in every relationship you're in. There's a cost. And you have to ask yourself, what is the cost of being in there? If the cost is you have to lose yourself, you can't be who you are, do what you do, you can't be the person you are because you must conform to them in order to coexist peacefully, the cost is you.
Well, I think that the number one thing is you have to have a very clear vision, a very clear goal of where you want to go, because only then you will get there. You can have the best airplane or the best ship in the world, but if the captain doesn't know where to go, he will just drift around. If the pilot does not know where to go, he will just drift around with his plane. So I think the key thing is that we know where we're going, and that you're very passionate about that, that you see it always in front of you, the goal.
I praise you, God, that I am fearfully, wonderfully made. I praise you, God.
So with me today is David McKnight. He has a unique ministry of helping people understand the uniqueness of how they were created and how that fits into how they relate to other people in their marriages or in their leadership skills, wherever it may be. So David, how did you come to the point where you decided that there's something right about everybody, which is really the name of your website and the name of your ministry? What's right about you? How did you come to that?
Well, first and foremost, I guess I was raised in a home that believed there was a God and a God who created us. I guess I inherently believed that from the start and was probably attracted to those ideas or books or whatever, courses even in high school and college that would begin to reveal some of that. So I minored in psychology and majored in philosophy, worked for a year and a half in a psych ward, in a locked psych ward, looking at that kind of behavior and seeing aberrant behavior and the pain that's caused from people not understanding what's right about them. So it just kind of naturally led itself into working for a client, then hired me to work for them to help people understand what was right about them. Everybody's got something unique, and so I began to study and digest everything I could around that whole idea. So I've just been expanding on that concept for the last 30 years.
Well, what is right about us, or what is right about you, is a unique paradigm shift. Because most of the time, David, we don't think about people of what is right about them. We always accent on what is wrong about them. And it comes up in conversations when we talk about people, coworkers, sometimes even our spouse. We say, well, these are all the things that they do that irritate me. So this shift of thinking about what is right about them comes about by a means of training. It comes about by a belief structure, doesn't it? I mean, it just doesn't happen because you say it, we should.
Right. It does come from a belief structure that I've been working on and building pieces to it for the last 30 years. My antenna is always up for opportunities to see that in somebody and to help them. I had a text message to me the other day. I'm with a group of men. We meet once a week and sharing Bible study and then just what's going on in everybody's life. And I'm always saying, they know my theme. What's right about you? So I get a text from one of the gentlemen in that group, and he said, I was so frustrated with my son. I was just fit to be tied. I didn't know what to do. And then I remembered you always saying there's something right about everybody. And so I started to question my son and ask him kind of why he was doing what he was doing and what was satisfying about it. These are some questions I told him to begin asking. And his son just opened up to him and said, Dad, I just want more time with you, and you're not giving it to me. And if I just had it, things would be better. And he texted me to say it changed their whole relationship because he looked at his son and asked the question, what's right about my son? What I'm observing bothers me, frustrates me. I want to walk away from him. But if I looked at him and said what was right and began asking questions to get at that information, it changed their whole relationship.
One of the things that I've noticed about you, David, is that you have a lot of experiences with helping people to change this paradigm shift. When we talk about, say, the marketplace, there are a lot of problems in the marketplace today. I mean, I've been part of teams that just haven't worked. And the leader has no clue as to how to lead this team or how to get this team on the right page, because they're all skilled people and they're all having to do their stuff, but they don't get along. So how does that work? How do you see that scenario work out in the way that you are presenting this case today, that there's something right about everybody?
Good question. I recently, in the past year, had opportunity to work for an organization. It was a nonprofit. They were the executive association for a medical team. The leader of this group, the executive director, she didn't have problems, but she wanted to make it better. And so she invited me in to sit with I think she had 7 staff members. And I had them do what was simply the strength finder. It was a quick and easy way to get at some basic information about everybody in the room. And then we sat around the table and talked about the strengths and had everybody acknowledge what they saw in each person. There was one person there who felt she had nothing good in her. Yet she was very good at her job, but she'd never been told that there was anything good about her. So that changed. I mean, slowly she began to acknowledge that there was something good, and I told them to affirm her and value her, and they were looking at the possibility of not having office space, but being able to work from home. Now that takes a bit of discipline on everybody's part to be productive in that situation. But they got to the point where they really understood each other, valued each other. Her leadership was valued. And I recently ran into her at a restaurant, and she came up to me and said, so I said, "Are you still in your space?" She says, "No, we've moved. Everybody's at home working." And things were working out really well because they began to honor each other and value each other and affirm each other and move things forward and be productive. But I think there are 5 things that we as people cannot live without. And one is an identity. Who am I? 2 is meaning, and then satisfaction, freedom, lastly, a sense of hope. Now, those kind of encompass things that we all need. And so, as a consultant working with people, those are 5 things I begin looking for. Are they alive and well in this person, or if a lack of sense of meaning or satisfaction or freedom, or they've lost their hope? And then it kind of goes back to their identity, who they are.
Well, David, I've noticed in my lifetime that, and including my own life, I have a tendency of going to the negative all the time. And because of that, there's cynicism, there's sarcasm, there's all those kinds of things. But even when we have conversations amongst ourselves, sometimes we have a tendency of, rather than talking about that person's uniqueness and characteristics that bring out something good from their lives, we're usually criticizing for all the things they do as bad. First of all, why is that, and how can we prevent that from happening more often than not?
We all have a tendency for what I would call litigation of our existence. In a sense, think there's a judge and we're litigating ourselves in our own head. What's good, what's bad, mostly what's bad. And so if that's the tune that's in our head, I'm litigating who I am, what I do, what's my purpose. If I'm litigating that all the time, well, I'm going to litigate it for you because that's what's inside of me. But if I have a sense that, there's something right about me and I'm working to bring more of that out and develop it, and I want to do that for others. And so here's an example. A husband comes to me at a place that I do some coaching and counseling, and he says, "My wife and I just aren't getting along. We argue a lot, and I don't know what to do." And I said, well, my sense is that when we are in a corner, backed into a corner, and that often happens when spouses are arguing, one feels backed into a corner, they go to their strength, and then they kind of amp up their strength. And so that's when the yelling starts, and they're coming at you with their fastball, if you will. So I challenged him simply, all right, you know what your wife's saying to you. Listen and just try and honor what she's saying. And just try it for a week. So he did, and he came back, and the next week he told me, well, it works. It absolutely works. She calmed down. I get it. We can now communicate. People, we have what's right about us. My daughter loves a plan, and so when things go awry, she goes to her planning mode and puts it on steroids. So I have to remind her not everybody thinks like her, and she's got to back off. And so we go to what we do. We're attracted to what we do. We're looking for what it is we do, what's interesting to us. So understanding this is good for me, but what's interesting for that person? What's right about that person? Talking to a gentleman who's getting out of prison, there is something very right about you. And he says, well, no one had ever told me. They didn't identify it to me. They didn't show me, but now I see it. I can go be more than just a janitor or someone who pushes a broom or flips a burger. Can have a life. Yes, because first and foremost, God created that person, and their sense of who they are comes from what we see in somebody. I see the gold in you, and I want you to know that, and I want you to see it. I want you to develop it. That's where it begins.
Well, I think that's very fascinating. I think the standard is really quite high to think this way. For example, you can kind of diagnose me. I have a loved one, and they are always late. And I am always try to be on time or be ahead of time, right? So that, to me, always being late, never being prepared to be on time, just really bothers me. And it kind of overshadows the things that I know this person has unique qualities that are good. So how do I deal with that? Because it's two lifestyles that are competing for dominance in our relationship.
You're imposing what's right about you on someone else. And I find that when I relax about that, I'm similar understanding of that. My father-in-law reminded me of that when I got married. And I want that person to know that there's something very good and right about them. So honoring that which is good and right about them and that which rubs you the wrong way, you're looking at the dirt around them in essence. And so if you can just look at what's good and right, the dirt will soon fall off.
So in other words, some of these things you're not going to necessarily solve by just noticing that they have good qualities. It may change your attitude toward them and give you a little bit more grace maybe when they're always late. And you can remind yourself, yeah, but they have these other good qualities that I really appreciate. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, and if you honor that person for who they are, you might find that their tardiness begins to slip away, begins to fade away, because you're honoring their worth, their value, their sense of significance in who they are. Generally, people will begin to respond to that, but when you're pointing out what's wrong with them, and there's usually pushback, and so they tend to do it again and again and again. Self-worth is often wrapped up in what I do. And I think that's more what a Western culture really look at. We want to know when you're at a party, well, what is it that you do? So we go to some occupation or something like that to justify who we are, which in fact, it may not even begin to say anything about who you are. So it comes from trying to fulfill someone else's expectation.
Well, let me just further this a little bit, David. For example, how does this whole concept, how does that benefit who we are in our families and then maybe in our leadership? Because I think that most people probably read things that help them develop their leadership, but few materials really dive deep into who they are and how uniquely they've been created. I think that's what's so fascinating to me, because once you get down to that bedrock, and this is how God created you, these are the characteristics, and this is why you lead the way you lead. Now, I would think that's one of the more important reasons why a person should figure out who they are and how they've been created. What do you say?
I agree. To know your core value, to know what it is you do when you are at your best. A lot of people have no sense of that, and that's what I want people to understand. You know, I tell parents when we're talking about their children, and I have them listen to the active verbs that their child uses when they're excited about what they're doing or what it is they're doing, because that gives them a little glimpse into the heart of that child. So I've talked to parents in terms of, you want to transfer good values to your child, and you want them to be good people, be good citizens. And so I talked to them about there are hooks on the wall you hang things on. And so your child has to know that you know who they are, and then you can begin to hang those values on those hooks. But if you don't take the time to understand your give them a safe place, give them a sense of their own worth, what it is they do, and a sense that they will have significance, you can try hanging those things up there, but they're going to blow off. But if your child knows that about themselves, then they have that core purpose to always hang on to. Come rain or come shine, no matter what happens to them. Now, I refer back to raising my own daughter. Because I started this work about 30 years ago, she came along 2 or 3 years into it, and I believed that they were telling me that the best information about anybody is found in their childhood because there's no adult formation wrapped around it. It's pretty free. And so I began observing her and listening to what she was saying and how she played and how she engaged people. And there was always a word that came out of her, and it was planning. Well, to make a long story short, later on in high school, she said to me, Dad, my friends have great ideas, but I can litigate them. Further down the road, I told her, I think you could do a great job in college, but you're going to miss out on the experience. So take your planning desires and bring it to whatever you're involved with. So take it out a little further. Now she's working for the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so I said, Meredith, in all the things that you've done, what's the thing that you enjoy most? What is it that you do? She says, Dad, I can take an idea or a project and I can bring it to fruition. I can make it happen. Now, she takes that in a number of scenarios that she's been in, and that's what she does best. And so that's what she told the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it's working for her. But I've watched her do that over and over and over again, and she knows at the very core that's who she is. So she doesn't have to get involved in things that she thinks somebody else wants her to do. She knows what she can do. And that's what I want people to understand. You have the ability to get involved in a number of possibilities given what's right about you.
So I understand that storyline with your daughter, and it's very powerful. So how does your ministry work with other people? I mean, in some ways, you were day in, day out with your daughter to see how she progressed. What were her unique characteristics? But how do you deal with people, like, say, that have marriage problems? How do you work with them? Tell us how it works. Yeah. Or how does it work when you're doing a leadership seminar on the same principles? How does it all work? What tools do you use?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I know something right about everybody. So if I'm talking to mom and dad about their 6-year-old or mom and dad about each other, I know there's something right about each one of them. And so sometimes there's some resistance to that whole idea. So not everybody wants to, there's usually some back and forth going on. But there are tools in our day and age, they weren't available 40 years ago, that are available now that will give us a pretty good indication of someone's behavior. And so if they will do some of this work for me, we get some third-party evidence for who they are and what they do well, and get them to agree with that, see it in the other person, and begin to look at their problems and see how they might be part of an exacerbation of that, what's good about them, where they're on steroids with their thing, trying to jam something down someone's throat. Well, I had a couple, they own a business. We were in their office, and we were talking about their employees and their business, and then they both were running at the business, and the wife says, okay, enough about the business, let's talk about us. And she was an operations person, and he was the visionary and building the business. She was making it run. And so she says, well, at home, I want you to be present with me and not be dreaming about things down the road. I need you to be, as a husband, I need you to be present in what we're doing and how we're operating. And he wasn't even aware that he was doing that because that's who he was. That's how he built his business. That's how it worked for him in his business. And he didn't realize that it was an impingement on his relationship at home. So when that was identified, things calmed down big time. And I've seen that repeatedly over and over again. When there's a misunderstanding between a couple, I get them to just calm down and let's look at what's right about each of you. Then diagnose the problem and see how we can change and make things better. And I've had wives say to me, I mean, you're telling me that what you're saying about him, that's his gift to me, and I've been trying to change it for 15 years. And I said, why don't you honor it and watch what happens? And then meet with them 6 months later, and she goes, I had no idea he could be so good, because she began to see what his behavior was that of something that would benefit the both of them, but she was looking at it through her own lenses to see it her way and saw her husband as up against her. I've had a husband say to me in the middle of a family meeting to his wife, I realize now that your gift that you bring to our family, I have not honored it because it didn't come in the package that I thought it should be in, so I was not honoring you. And for that, I am truly sorry, and I want to go forward and honor that which you do. Because when you do it, it's the best thing for our family. But I realized I wasn't honoring it. So getting people to recognize what's right. See, it takes a little time. If we want to find out what's wrong, well, that's pretty easy. Dirt's right there. We can dig it up real easily. But if I want to find out what's right about somebody, it takes a little time. But if I'm believing, first and foremost, that there is something there, I'll take the time to find out.
Well, that works the same way, David, I assume, in the workplace. So if you're leading a team or you have an assignment that has a lot of people underneath you, and there is usually in that kind of setting some sort of conflict, whatever, you applying these kinds of principles will help you discern that maybe the people that are in contrast to each other, really, if they learn how to appreciate their uniqueness, it could be a great team effort. Is that correct?
Yes. So you're going to lead according to the design inside of you. So what is it? And so you need to understand first and foremost as a leader, that first and foremost. And then you need to understand who do you need on your team to round out the leadership process. So you look for those people and you honor gifts that other people have that you don't in order to make things happen. So a lot of the leadership snafus are wrong. Some people are genuinely gifted in disseminating responsibilities to others, getting the results not at the end of their fingertips, but at the end of others. And they're naturally gifted to do that. And I can determine that in an interview with somebody because people will say, yeah, I can do that, but I want to know what's the evidence. Again, looking for what's right. What's the evidence in your life that you will work that way? Because you might do it for 3 weeks and then you'll go back to doing it yourself. So if a person is motivated to lead as an individual contributor, they lead by example, and when things don't go right, they tend to get pretty compulsive with their leadership and drive people away.
I would think that this kind of principle system, it would be very helpful for people in the hiring process, because even though we're looking for a certain skill set, we also, I would think, in the way that the world works today in the workplace, it's all built around team, that you'd need somebody not only with the skill set, but also with the ability to work with others and bring a uniqueness there that can mesh with others. Otherwise, you're going to have a terrible team like so many of our sports teams. Some people are very talented, but they can't win the game.
Yeah, my definition of leadership in relationship to maybe business, I think maybe in all walks of life, is being who you're meant to be, doing what you're meant to do in the moment that it's needed, and helping others do the same. So at the end of that leadership role, you've got a new leader. You've not got another follower, but you've grown another leader. And so people need to understand what it is they do it, encourage others to do what they do, and do it best. That works. I don't know how else to say it, but it does work. I want to work with somebody who identifies what's good and right about me and gives me opportunity to do it. And so I want to work with a leader who will do that. And so it goes back to this whole thing of we're often in this process of litigating our existence. And I think that's probably a big part of what's going on in many people, justifying their existence, realizing that they need to understand just who they are and then honor what's around them. So I encourage people, if you're new on a team, get to know your team. Get to know what's right about each person. Take the time. There's a quote I read many years ago that people are often, they're sent off to training camps, they take courses, they do all this stuff, and in 45 years of work, no one ever took so much as 45 minutes of time to find out who they were. So we can apply techniques to people, but if they don't respond well to who they are, they're not going to work.
David, you've brought some real challenging thoughts to the microphone today. You bring these principles to life in counseling of couples and marriages. You do premarital counseling. You do leadership conferences. You do governance training for organizations, both in the for-profit and nonprofit areas, in just how people and personalities work together as a whole. So if they wanted to talk to you further about all the things that we've talked about today, how do they go about getting a hold of you?
Well, my website is McKnightLeadershipGroup.com. Email is dfmcknight@gmail.com. And my phone number is 612-990-6604.
And for those of you that are on our City Sites podcast list, of course, David is on our clients page where all this information can be found. And of course, that's citysitesurbanmedia.com under the clients tab. Thanks, David, for being a part. We hope to revisit some of your concepts in the near future.
Thank you for joining us today. Every Friday, we bring you this podcast with interviews with people who are challenging the status quo of Christianity and challenging the cultural norms of our day. Please help us get the word out by sharing the link to this podcast with your online friends and family. Our website also contains other podcasters who are a part of the City Sites network of communicators, all sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. Our website is citysitesurbanmedia.com.